Okay, then
Yeah, so
we can proceed. I would just uh, announce our speaker, and people from different platforms will be following us, and also people after this we will have a live. We will have actually this meeting, this webinar recorded and sent on some of the platforms as Dr. Kriukow will agree. I will just shortly announce our guest speaker with just an amazing experience in qualitative research today with us. Is Dr. Jarek Kriukow. He's going to speak about his experience in qualitative research and just share some of the valuable insights from his career and the things that he enjoys to do, I believe, and just with his YouTube channel and all the things, consulting with major uh, faculties and colleges and also students around the world. So I will just leave the floor to you, and we will have we have, as I mentioned to you, some questions
uh-huh.
pre-prepared. So it's
Yeah.
we will have at the end 15 minutes for Q&A session
Mhm.
for our guest speaker. So I will leave the floor to you.
Okay, yeah, thank you for the introduction, and also really happy to hear somebody pronouncing my name correctly because we're same kind of language group, at least. Yeah, so I'm so used to all these different variations of my name. So yeah, you got it exactly right. And yeah, so thank you for inviting me here. And what we'll do, I thought I would start by just quickly explaining uh, to everybody what I'm about to talk about. And I will talk about qualitative research, just as it was explained a minute ago. And I was thinking uh, how to start and what to focus on in relation to qualitative research, because it's such a broad topic, such a broad field and area. So uh, I have, as it been said just a minute ago, I have a lot of experience in qualitative research. So I graduated. I'm based in Scotland at the moment. I'm Polish by nationality, but my story is much longer, so it's too long for this webinar. But I have a root in what used to be Russia and now is Ukraine, so that's where my dad comes from. So all sorts of movements. But by nationality, I'm Polish. But I spent the last 13, I think, years here in the UK and Scotland. I got my master's first in teaching English to speakers of other languages here from this university, University of Edinburgh. That's where I was first exposed to the idea of research. I literally had no idea what research even means when I walked into this first research methods class. I remember being completely confused and unprepared and really anxious. But then I continued. I did my PhD here as well. So my PhD was about Polish migrants in the UK, and specifically how they use their language and how speaking a language that's not your own, your mother tongue, how and whether it influences your sense of self, so who you are and your identity. So that was my focus. But the thing is, so yeah, I was exposed to research. It was strongly about research. Even my master's, then obviously my PhD was 100% about research. That's how I started to kind of like it. Initially, I really didn't like it. I felt it was extremely confusing and just weird thing to learn about. And I definitely did not expect that I would ever do anything that has to do with research professionally. But the way it happened is I stayed after my PhD. I stayed at the university as a research assistant, just because I had to find a job. I really didn't know what to do with what I just completed with my PhD. And gradually, uh, I gradually started to develop this interest in research even more. Eventually started to teach at the university as well. Eventually left the university, started my own business, so my research consulting and this kind of thing. So, and from there, it's a long story, but you can I'll type in the chat. Actually, I'll type in the chat my website. I'm typing right now. it's my website where you can also learn about me as well as just get access to plenty of resources, uh, and just know more, because it's no point for me to go through every single detail what I've done over the years. But long story short, I'm a research consultant and data analyst. I work with lots of universities and I teach at universities and I do some research here and there. I work with big companies such as Volvo, the car company, or some banks. I work with plenty of individual students and clients and all sorts of clients, so students and researchers and lecturers, everybody. So I'm just strongly involved in the whole idea of spreading, I guess, research skills mainly. And what I do, how I see myself, how I usually explain what I do based on what people tell me, based on what people share about the way I teach or what I helped them with, is that I try to make sure that people perceive research as something that's just much more straightforward and clearer and easier than what we normally tend to think. So as I said, I was initially very stressed and anxious when when I first learned about research, and up to this day, I feel like the way that some universities teach, some textbooks teach, some lecturers teach about research is partly to blame for how people feel about research, because I speak to students every week and they are absolutely confused and petrified. And I often explain that it's much easier than what it seems. So that's kind of the message I usually communicate in my teaching. Another thing I do is my YouTube channel. So I'll just type it here as well. The name of the YouTube channel, where I talk about research and data analysis and all sorts of things. But for today, what I decided to do, we don't have that much time, and I know we have a mixture of people probably here and definitely later when it's been shared. Some of you may have experience, some of you may be completely new, so there is a mixture of all levels. So I was thinking what to do and how to do it. So to have a narrative, like general structure to this, I will be talking about research being a qualitative research being a flexible research design. It's one of the terms that some people use to describe qualitative research, flexible design. I'll explain how it's flexible, why it's flexible, whilst just walking you briefly through the whole process of research and different considerations. So for those who are more experienced, you'll still kind of maybe have a recap of some points about planning a research study, whilst also learning about why I believe it's a flexible design. For those of you who are completely new, hopefully you can also, as I'm doing this, understand some reasoning, some processes involved in planning a research study. So hopefully there will be something for everybody. And while I'm doing this, I strongly encourage you also to ask questions, to type your questions. At the end, there will be time to just to answer the question. So I'm planning it for around 45 minutes and then 15 minutes for questions. But and I always try to make sure I answer every single question. But I do encourage you to ask and start typing these questions even now or when I talk, because sometimes I may have uh, something to say straight away to your question. It's just easier to react. So yeah, so I strongly encourage you to do post your questions. It's supposed to be kind of a Q&A about research, really, but like I said, to give structure to it while you're thinking about your questions, I'll be talking. So yeah, so let's start. So as I said, qualitative research, and and I call it, and some people call it, a flexible design. It's not something I came up with, this term. I've learned about it a long time ago when I was studying for my PhD, where according to some terminology, quantitative and qualitative research are also described as fixed design and flexible design. So without going into too much detail of quantitative research, just to kind of summarize and recap, quantitative research is the one that's more about numbers and statistics. This is more, let's say, scientific kind of research, whereas qualitative research is the one that is more oriented towards exploring individual perceptions and beliefs and people. So that's the main definition. So none of these is more important, none of these is better than the other, because there's been a huge debate over the years, just like cat people and dog people, and we have the same about research. Quantitative research people and qualitative research people constantly arguing. There is no such thing as better or worse. They both complement each other, and they both can achieve just help you achieve completely different results. So So that's how you should also think about it if you're planning a research study. There are some things that, for example, quantitative research, the main strengths would be how it enables you to generalize. Whenever you see findings that say, for example, 20% of school kids in the UK love chocolate or whatever, is just an example, obviously. Obviously, whoever said that, so the researcher, they could never explore the views of every single school kid in the UK. So how did they do that? How can we know that 20% of all kids in the UK or school kids in the UK do that? So that's when you employ quantitative research, so the statistical one, because through very careful planning, you can actually have a small sample, relatively small sample, which means a group of participants. However, from these results, you can generalize. If you're really careful and you're following procedures for developing that group, that sample, that group of participants, you can later say that this group can actually be used to generalize to represent the broader population. So maybe they just talk to 1,000 school kids, and yet based on that they can talk about the whole population. So that's probably the main structure strength of quantitative research, as well as its ability to basically predict the future in a way. So if you're observing something happening, so I often use the example of jaywalking. So when people cross the street illegally, if we want to conduct a study inquiry into this phenomenon, let's say in my town people do it all the time and there are accidents and casualties, we want to do research into jaywalking. Depending on what I'm trying to achieve, I will select the different design. So if, for example, I want to have access to these statistics and this sort of thing, of course I'm going for quantitative research. I can observe, for example, I can gather data and know exactly how many people cross the street yearly or every week or every day. And the fascinating thing about it is that I can also predict how many people will possibly cross the street next year and how many people will die, for example. So you can see how powerful it is. But on the other hand, if I want to talk to them, I want to understand not how many people will die, how many people will cross the street. I want to understand why they do it, because maybe I believe that's the main part. That's the only way in which we can prevent these things from happening. I want to talk to them. I will probably develop a qualitative study where I talk to them. Maybe I will interview them. I'll understand their perceptions. So that's how. It's a very short example, but how these general design differ, these two designs. And this quantitative design, like I said, is often described as being a fixed one because it's just much more scientific. Like I said, it's much more like maths, where you either know how to do sorry, how to do it, or you don't know how to do it, so you have to get it right. In qualitative research, which is described as a flexible design, it's not that straightforward. It's actually what I really like about it, but at the same time, what many students do not like about it, and that's why they are stressed and worried, because I very often find myself saying things like "it depends" or you have to decide, and things like that. I wish I could give them answers when students ask me, how do I do this, how do I do that. But the truth is, it very often does depend. That's why it's so flexible. So I'll break the whole process down, and at each stage I'll argue to you how and why research qualitative research design is flexible. So the first thing, where when we plan this study, so let's say you are planning or you're thinking of doing qualitative research, you have to know obviously the problem that you want to address. I'll be focusing now only on qualitative problems, but of course, as you can imagine, there may be things that you decide to solve or address, and maybe they call for quantitative design. But consider that we want to just talk about qualitative methods. Very often you hear or read in books about uh, there a need for there to be a gap in research, a gap in knowledge. So that's literally this, the gap in research is something that we constantly hear about. And I remember that's the first thing that I heard about in that university course as well, that you have to have a gap, something that's not research. That's where your research will be. However, this is flexible. This is flexible and this is misleading. And very often I work with students trying to kind of correct their misconceptions about the gap, because if you think about it, it's very difficult these days to find really find something that's never been done before or never been addressed before. So you may spend the whole year trying to find such area. And then the second problem is, as one of my supervisors when I was doing my PhD told me, sometimes there is a gap, but it doesn't mean there is a need for your research. So just because there is a gap does not mean there is a need. We need that research. So that's another thing. So this shows you why it's not that easy. It's, like I said, it's much more flexible. So for example, with that gap, that's the first element where you can be flexible, which means that it doesn't always have to be that there is complete emptiness, there is nothing. So there may be, for example, a study into, let's say, Chinese students' perceptions of education in the UK. So there may be plenty, and in fact, there are plenty of such studies. So, do I, if I want to explore Chinese students' perceptions of education in the UK, do I do that or do I not do that just because there is no gap? I can still do it, and this so-called gap can be many things, because I can still do this study because maybe I'm hoping to just add more to that research, add more data. That can be your argument. So very often you can do almost exactly what others have done before, because you're just adding more evidence for that. So that's good enough reason to think about this study. Another thing is that maybe there are many studies into Chinese students' perceptions of education in the UK, but maybe there are no studies of Polish students' perceptions in the same context, in which it is a gap. So it's kind of been researched before, but not for this group of participants. So, and of course, my argument is it will be easy to construct this rationale or this argument why we need it, because Chinese students, Polish students, they are completely different, cultural backgrounds. So I can easily argue that research into Spanish students, French students, Chinese students, all sorts of students have demonstrated, for example, that they struggle with this education system. But because Polish students are so different, we still don't know about them. We have good reasons to believe that they may struggle based on other findings, but we don't know that for a fact. So we do need to conduct this study. So like I said, the whole idea. So the first thing you start with when planning a study is thinking about what you're going to do, and like I said, often encouraged to think about the gap. And this is where the first time when, in my opinion, that flexibility is already very important. So another one. So what you usually do after this, you start once you have your idea, you have your research questions, you have the aim for your study, so you have an idea of where it's going and why we need that. Usually you start thinking about a couple of different things. So you're starting to think about the participants. So who do I need to talk to, or who do I need to research to get answers to my research questions? And another related thing is, how do I get these answers? How do I collect the data? So that's where you start planning your study. And there is a thing to remember or to understand, that in research there are different methodologies, and that's so stay with me now, and if you don't know what that is, I'll try to explain it as simply as possible. Many people come to me again and they kind of panic and they say, I need to choose methodology, I need to do a case study, I need to do grounded theory. So to those of you who are completely new to these terms, a research methodology, the way I usually describe it, is like a template for doing research. There are different methodologies, different ways in which you can do research, like ready templates. And these templates include certain methods, they include certain beliefs, philosophical beliefs and things like that. The way, generally, ways in which we conduct research, uh, reasons why we do research, and different methodologies, different kind of reasons may suit us. So these methodologies are, for example, case study, that many of you may have heard about, very popular one, and very often we use it in kind of everyday language. Then there is grounded theory methodology, a different methodology. Sounds very scary, but it's really not. I have many videos about that, and I explain grounded theory methodology is basically when you're conducting research into something that's pretty under researched. We don't know much about it. You want to develop a detailed either theory or understanding of it. There is not much literature for you to read because we don't know that much about the topic. So there are lots of little elements, and then put together, they may you may come to conclusion. Oh, okay, so it sounds like I'm doing grounded theory study because I'm doing something new. I'm proposing new theory. There is not much literature, so all of that means I'm doing grounded theory study. It's one of several main methodologies, such as case study, grounded theory, phenomenology, ethnography, and narrative inquiry, where you study people's narratives, how they talk, how they describe, for example, their life or life events. So this is methodology. And notice that even the way I said it, notice the order. I said once you're thinking about your study and you're thinking what you're going to do and how you're going to do it, then you may reflect and say, oh, maybe it is a grounded theory study. And this is very important, and this is how it's flexible again. So people come to me and they say, I really need to do, or I really want to conduct a grounded theory study, or I really want to conduct a case study or a phenomenology. Help me how to do it. What methods do I need? What participants do I need? And this is a huge mistake. You should never do that. You should not think about what methodology I want to do in my study before you actually know what you want to do in your study and how you want to achieve it. So the first thing you should decide is, like I said, what I'm going to try to achieve, and then who do I talk to, or and then how do I gather that information. So do I need questionnaires? Do I need interviews? Do I need some other method? This, by the way, is also super flexible, and this is entirely up to you. So you're in charge of this whole process. You are deciding. There is no guidelines that will tell you to explore this kind of topic you need these methods. No, you have to be knowledgeable about it. You have to use your own judgment and say, for example, when I was doing my study into Polish migrants, I was thinking, okay, how should I collect that data? Because I also kind of know that group of people. I'm Polish by nationality, and you're deciding then, okay, I think interviews will be good. Do I think that focus groups, so like kind of group discussions, will be good for this group? I personally, for example, didn't feel like they would like to be in a focus group with other migrants, possibly talking about their challenges, problematic experiences, things they're kind of ashamed to discuss. So I made a decision that I don't need focus groups. So again, it's you're very flexible, and you're deciding what you need in your study. Later, after all these things, when you have decided for what methods you think you need, then you're looking at how you are thinking about your study, and based on that, you can decide that this fits a certain methodology. This is the order in which this should happen. And we are constantly being misled by lots of instructions and books and lectures and everything into thinking that it's the opposite, basically, because almost every book will start, will, for example, cover methodologies before research methods, and lots of other problems. Basically, people feel like they have to choose methodology, and that's the starting point. It's not. So this is how it's flexible. Plus, you don't even have to have a methodology. That's another thing not everybody knows, and I very often have to explain to people. You don't have to have a methodology at all. You can conduct qualitative research, and that's the name of kind of your general design, and then explain, I'm using these methods, I'm doing this. You don't have to specify which methodology. Remember what I said earlier, methodologies are like templates for you to make it easier to choose from. If the way I am planning my research suits a case study or a grounded theory, I can say that my study is in fact a grounded theory study or case study. But it's only to make it easier. But if it doesn't suit anything, you don't have to try to force it into one of these methodologies, because it's enough to say, I'm conducting a detailed qualitative study, for example, into a certain topic. So again, lots of flexibility in terms of that. Plenty of flexibility when you develop your research methods. So the next thing, once you decided, for example, on I'm going to use interviews, you're going to design these interviews. And that's again where people get anxious, and they don't know how to design them. These questions, for example. Again, I have plenty of resources about that, so feel free to watch some of my videos. But basically, again, you are in charge. So that, these two things always true. There is flexibility, and you are in charge. So when you're developing your interview guide, your interview questions, of course, it helps to know a little bit about the literature, because usually you'll be reading some literature, you'll be exploring some previous research, and it helps to, if I, for example, want to explore the topic of anxiety or self-confidence, of course, it helps if I read some previous findings about this topic, because then maybe there is a huge well-known model of anxiety that exists in the field, and you can't really discuss it without knowing this model and what different components anxiety has. So So this is the reason why, of course, it helps to be a little bit aware of what's happening in certain literature. But otherwise, again, you are in charge, and you decide, how do I structure my questions? What do I want to know for my study? So that's important. Again, it's very difficult to remember when you have this constant pressure. When you're a student, you have a pressure from supervisors. When you're a researcher, you may have pressure from, you know, whoever was providing the funding, or the university, or the publisher, or whatever. There's always this pressure, but you have to remember, I'm the most knowledgeable person when it comes to what I want to do. So I am in charge of the questions I want to ask. So you're designing your interview the way you want it. You can be very flexible in terms of combining different approaches as well. Again, something I did, for example, for my PhD study was, I just randomly read about this approach to interviewing that exists in psychology, and in fact, some police forces were also adopted this approach when interrogating and questioning their witnesses. It's based on cognitive psychology, so based strongly on psychology and findings from research that shows how we process information, basically how our brains work. So based on all that, some people developed this idea of cognitive interviewing, which basically is a method that helps to support memory retrieval, helps to remember, helps our participants to remember well. Because often when you interview people, they don't tell you everything, not just because they don't want to tell you that information, but very often because they just can't remember, or they are stressed, or both. So this is a method that that some people use. So for example, as a the student, PhD student, I decided to combine some elements of that cognitive interviewing into my interviews, because again, this was my judgment. I was asking these migrants questions about things that happened sometimes 10 years ago when they came to the UK. So I knew they would sometimes struggle to remember. But again, it's just, I'm telling you that to show you that you can be very flexible when designing these methods. I constantly talk to students every week. If it's not through university, then I just provide also private tuition, and they constantly talk to me about the research designs. And although they feel that they are confused and they don't know how to do it, I'm very often very impressed with what they are doing in terms of the methods, for example, that they are choosing and how they are choosing these methods. So they can be so creative that sometimes they think about things I would never even thought about. So to give you an example, I just talked to somebody last week, and she's doing a study into some unconventional medicine in South America, and so different plants, like medicinal plants that some certain tribes go and collect in the forest. And for example, she, in addition to interviewing this population, she went there and she lived there. She did this thing she called plant walks. So basically, they would take her for a walk. They would walk into that forest or jungle, and they would show her different plants and talk to her, and she was recording that. So there is nothing like that in. I mean, I've never heard of it from a textbook, for example. But I was really impressed with that because, she did what she thought was the right way, and she thought would be a valuable source of information, and that's what she did. And it's not the only example. People often show me these very creative things that they do, for example, with their participants. Very often it has to do with arts-based research, which is research based on art, where people are asked to draw something or create something. There are some workshops, even some there can be some drama kind of presentation, something like that. So all sorts of things with involving art, different forms of art. So again, the bottom line is people get really creative with developing their methods once you remember that you can and you should be flexible, and that you are in charge of your study again. So you do everything that you think needs to be done to get access to that information. Of course, and I'll be highlighting that and stressing that all the time. I'm not saying you should not read. I'm not saying you should not respect what people tell you in the books, because you should. You should always have this evidence, this backup for your most of your decisions and ideas in form of a literature. So if you're involved in academia in any form, so it doesn't matter if you're a student or anybody else, doing research, you'll probably know that you are expected to support whatever you do and say with literature. So of course you should do that. But usually when you provide some evidence from the literature, then of course, everybody's happy, your supervisor is happy, they know that you've done the reading. But otherwise, you are still, free to experiment a lot, and make your own decisions when planning these methods. So now I'm just looking at my list for what else. There's so much that is flexible at every single stage. So I kind of try to gather some examples of stages chronologically in research where you are flexible. So when you're selecting your participants and your sample, so-called sample, so the group of people you're going to explore, that's another way. That's another thing where you are flexible. Of course, again, you're making judgments for who you want to talk to. You're making judgments for how many people you need to interview. That's a very common question. If you later want me to talk about it in the Q&A, I can talk about it more. How many people are enough for a qualitative study? Also, very often, even again earlier last week, I was talking to somebody about it. Very often, I get questions about different demographics. So, how do I select? Let's say this person was doing a study of care homes. So, here in the UK, where they look after older people, and this guy was saying. There is a population of different care workers. There are people who are males, females, and then different cultures. And he was asking me, how do I develop this sample? Does it have to be, for example, equal from every background and culture and gender? And again, unfortunately, my response was, it depends. It depends what you're trying to achieve in your study. If you're trying to compare, for example, males and females and their views, of course it makes sense to have at least similar number of males and females. It wouldn't make sense to have 19 males and one female if the goal of your study is to make comparisons between different views maybe held by females and males. But if this is not a goal, and your goal is to explore that particular workplace and what people say, in that care home, then you should not worry about, the equal distribution of the different demographic characteristics, because this is not the goal. If you just talk to just random people in that workplace, you're probably this is reflecting in fact this workplace, because that's how people are distributed. There may be people from the UK, there may be some couple of people who came here from different countries, there may be some females, some males, some different religions. It doesn't matter, because you're not interested in making claims based on some comparisons between groups. So that's important, and people often go into that rabbit hole of thinking about too many background and demographic characteristics when doing the research study. So I worked with that person from Canada, and she was doing a study into different psychotherapists and their perceptions of something. Doesn't really matter. But basically, so it was a large study already, and she had more or less equal distribution of males and females. But then her supervisors asked her to add more different kind of characteristics, to compare different backgrounds of different psychotherapists. And then it started with males and females. Then they asked about different levels of experience. Then eventually they even went into like sexuality, because they said there may be somebody, or I think like LGBT or something community. And I said that it doesn't matter. It's ridiculous to do that, because and I'm not talking about sexuality, any such characteristic. It's ridiculous, because it's never been the point of the study. So if you think in that logic, you would then have to start recruiting people who are single, married, with children, without children, and all sorts of things. So like I said, it's very easy to fall into that trap unless you have good reasons to specifically focus on certain characteristics, some demographics. Otherwise, you don't need to worry about it that much. But again, feel free to ask me if you have any questions about that. So um, now we're moving on to the analysis. So you're gathering the data, you gathered your data, you have to think about ways to analyze it. That's the main topic that I usually discuss in my channel, in fact. So plenty of videos about that if you're interested. How to analyze. There is no time for me to really go into how to analyze qualitative data now, but some points I often make again is that, well, it's definitely easier than you think it is. So if you don't feel that it's easy, then watch. I invite you to watch some of my content. where I break it down into easy steps. And there is again plenty of flexibility because basically it involves doing what you believe is right. There are some guidelines, so like coding, maybe you heard about coding. Coding is a method that researchers use to basically systematize the data they are collecting. It's almost like assigning uh, tags or labels. So if you think about it, if you collected lots of interviews and you have the transcripts, so you have the the written form of the interviews, um, then you have to somehow make sure that you remember all that because there are so many transcripts. People talk about so many things. How do I even make sense of that? So to do that, you reduce basically that volume of that data by categorizing it, sort of. So you're reading that data and you're creating these little tags. Like I said, basically they're called codes professionally. So you're reading everything and assigning certain codes, and then later on you're looking at all these codes, which become your actual window into your insight into your data. And then based on that, you're trying to decide how do I answer my research questions. Of course, it's a huge summary and simplification of the process, but it's more or less what happens. And at that stage, again, how you code it's an extremely flexible decision, and even more so is developing your themes. People very often panic about thematic analysis because that's what it is, and they ask, okay, where do the themes come from? How do they emerge? How do I know what they are? And again, I have to explain that you are in charge and you decide what themes you want to have in your study. So basically, through that coding that I mentioned, that exercise, um, you're breaking the data down into these smaller bits, and then you're looking at these codes. They help you really remember everything that you had in your data, and based on that, you can start thinking about, okay, so what have I learned? What was my goal? What was I supposed to answer in my study? And then based on your response, you're deciding what your themes are. Themes are basically topics, main topics running through the data, which help you answer the research questions. So that's how you develop themes. So again, you're in charge again, something that many people don't seem to be aware of. And then and you're flexible because there are many topics that the participants may have discussed in your study, which does not mean that they are all relevant. So you're flexible in choosing what is relevant, all that data that you gathered, what is relevant, how do we answer the research question. So like I said, it's a very dynamic and flexible also procedure. And then you're also flexible when it comes to how you do it in terms of what you use. So I just wanted to quickly mention that there's software for data analysis. It's important to understand, however, that usually this software is not something that does the analysis for you. Very many people wish and hope that this is the case, and then they are disappointed. But software for data analysis, they don't. It doesn't really just analyze the data for you. You have to understand the process, and software. It's like a calculator where you have to know what to input into the calculator to get the result. So it's kind of like that with software for data analysis. You have to understand data analysis to guide the software to give you kind of the results that you want. So there are lots of different software. I use usually NVivo. NVivo is just known software. It's extremely and um, ridiculously expensive. So I never recommend to anyone that they actually buy it. But very often universities provide a license for NVivo, so that's when you may go for it. There's other options: Quercos, MaxQDA, Atlas TI. By the way, just a quick question that I wanted to ask. I can't access the chat anymore. Is it working? Like, is this whole meeting still working? Because I can't see any questions either.
Um, Let me see.
Oh yeah, so at least you're, for a second I thought like, am I even live? Because I didn't see questions and I just saw that I can't anymore.
You
Like
are.
I can
We,
use the
we,
chat.
we have opened the Q&A section, so for everyone who is interested,
Mhm.
to just write some questions down, or you can raise your hand. We can just let you in, and you can
All right,
ask.
we'll do that. I still have a couple of things to mention. I just wondered, like, just before I finish, I just wanted to make sure that people can still like ask questions. But I still just I'll finish shortly and then
Yeah,
I'll
great.
start
We have
some.
some questions, so you can.
Okay,
It's
perfect. Yeah.
very
So
interesting.
okay, so let me just quickly go back to the topic. So in addition to that software, of course, as you may expect these days, there is more and more also talk about AI, artificial intelligence, and so much talk about, can I use it for research? The answer is yes. Again, on that YouTube channel of mine, I increasingly talk about AI in recent months because it's such a normal, part of our reality these days. And yeah, in many ways you can also use AI for your research. I explain how you can use it to develop some interview questions with you, how you can use it for data analysis, although you have to know exactly, again, what you're doing. It's kind of hard because ChatGPT is, it can be great, but I'm sure if you tried it, you've come to similar conclusions that it can be also completely silly and confused. So you have to always know what you are doing, because otherwise it will do something and give it to you and you won't even know that it's just complete rubbish. So but it can be used. It can be used for in many ways, either ChatGPT or other tools for research, for developing research or planning research. There are many tools for supporting your literature review. Plenty of tools. Again, I have a video in which I talk about this tool, Typeset. It's called typeset.io. I can't type in the chat, so I can't. But it's a good tool. But then you have other tools. You have ChatGPT. You have Google Bard. I think they changed their name. Gemini. Yeah, I think they called Gemini. So these tools are also brilliant for just doing literature review, where you have to read the literature. Of course, you have to still read the literature, but these tools will help you navigate it. Will give you some relevant articles that you're looking for. So that's another thing these days. Uh, don't listen to anyone that says that it's not a good idea to use AI in research, or it's cheating or whatever. The university, the institution of the academic institution itself is usually pretty archaic and just outdated in many ways. So as expected, there is a huge resistance from universities at the moment when it comes to AI. But it's ridiculous because 15, 20 years ago, there was resistance from the same institution to use software for data analysis, which now they all use. So definitely, it's a huge topic. You should definitely, if you want to be researchers, I guess, going into this uh, new reality, you should definitely know how to harness, all these tools as well for your benefit. Because I've done recently literature reviews that took me, not even a quarter of the time that I used before. If I had these tools when I was doing my PhD, I believe I would have done it, maybe a year earlier. So it can definitely be used to support you in what you're doing. So I guess, yeah, to just finish, I could talk about flexibility of research for another 2 hours, but you are basically flexible at every single stage. You're flexible in how you're reporting the results. That's another thing I often talk about. There are so many ways in which you can shape your results and present them. You're flexible in what you choose to discuss. People ask me about the discussion and how do I discuss. So I guess, yeah, the point is, as I keep saying, you have to remember that you have this autonomy and you are in charge of your study. You are the person who knows most about your study and what is good for your study. So that's something just to remember. But yeah, now I guess I'll be happy to answer questions. I hope that there's something. Like I said, it's very difficult to just talk about qualitative research because there's so many things I could talk about. But I thought I would kind of convey that message that is very flexible, because I think that's the main thing about research that needs to be understood, and it's very often not understood.
Thank you very much for your valuable insights. I just personally I appreciate the biography at the beginning. It was really insightful, and I'm just looking at the typeset.io. I previously didn't know about it, but now I just tried it, and it's so just a valuable companion, so to say. You have those insights as well. So
Yeah,
really,
even the
really,
even the free version, because of course they have the premium version, free version, but firstly, the free version is still really good. So even using the free version is still 100 times better than not using anything. And then if somebody, for example, is a full-time student or full-time researcher, I believe it's usually a good idea to, even if you have to pay for it, pay for the premium version for 1 month, then cancel. But in that month, you're going to utilize so much literature So it's probably again a good idea to use it. It's not as expensive as some other
Yeah.
software, but even the free version is really good.
Yeah, I really just respect the fact that you openly, so to say, criticize universities. And
Mhm.
yeah, we should always be self-reflective in terms of what do we teach the students and what do we present. And I think that you, during the lecture, during the you were speaking in the lecture that you held, you were really, so to say, objective and in real time, real context. So thank you once more. And we have some questions. Maybe I will just hand should I just read it to you? How can researchers effectively navigate the balance between maintaining flexibility and ensuring rigor in data collection analysis?
Mhm.
What are your ideas how to achieve this, especially when writing thesis where your paper is analyzed and evaluated?
Mhm. Yeah, it's a good question. It's definitely, as I said earlier, that's the main thing about you can't just be always flexible when, of course, you have these requirements, expectations, there are deadlines, there are specific structures where you have to follow them, especially as a student. So, of course, that's always the main, the main concern. But as I said during this speech, of course first and foremost you always have to rely on the literature, and only then, once you're kind of exploring that, and you're most importantly showing to the audience, whoever they are, that about that literature, you understand that literature, and only then, based on that, you're making your claims. That's when it usually tends to be okay. So, to give you an example, I always say that to students in general when they plan to talk to their supervisors about something, and sometimes they're not sure if the supervisor will like the idea. I always say, first, get prepared. Prepare some good arguments, show in the literature where you found it, and based on that, explain why you, for example, disagree or why you do it differently. Because if you just say, "I'm not going to do a focus group," in my study, for example, your supervisor wants you to do a focus group discussion, which is again like a group of people discussing things, one of the methods, and you don't think it's a good idea. If you just say it's not a good idea, or you even know this population and you say, I know them very well, they won't talk in a group, again, the supervisor will think, okay, well, she or he doesn't know what she's talking about. But if you go to the literature first and say, look, I've read about focus groups. It says that, for example, the participants need to be comfortable about each other, and also focus groups are not always good when discussing sensitive topics, and therefore I don't think it's a good idea for my study. So that's kind of the thing. I think it's always comes down to having good arguments and showing that a lot about research, because otherwise they will always direct you to books and say, well, you need to read more, maybe you misunderstood. So usually that's what it is. I would say the most challenging part of it, the most challenging situation at the moment, would be to convince them that, for example, you're using ChatGPT. I don't think that most people are ready for that. I think I could find an argument and convince people why, for example, if I wanted to just use ChatGPT in my study, because I do believe that you can and you should if you do it ethically. But I feel like there is, as a student, again, maybe understandably, because there is an expectation that you will actually learn new things as well. So maybe at the moment it's probably early to argue, I'm gonna use ChatGPT for my PhD research. But otherwise, usually some flexibility is actually it's really welcomed as well. So you're actually impressing your supervisors, your funding body, whatever, if you're showing that you're flexibly adopting things rather than just uncritically following things. So usually, yeah, that's the kind of
Thank
how
you. Yeah, is a resistance in terms of AI in academia. So yeah, probably it will be so until we come to agreement, maybe in few
Mhm.
years. Maybe from there is one more question written. I will just before that ask you just one, so to say, pre-prepared question.
Mhm.
What is a good step or first step for someone who wants to do a qualitative research?
Mhm.
Maybe in terms of your point of view, it doesn't matter if it's a student or already a graduate, bachelor. So,
Mhm.
yeah, thank
So,
you.
so just a research study, is that what you mean? And not like to start a career, but to do a study, a quality research study. What's the first? Okay.
then some maybe with some aspirations of having a
Mhm,
career or something like that.
mhm. Yeah, so I would say, so first, yeah, to do a study, I would say it's always the first step is always reading the literature. It's it's reflected in how all the degrees, the programs are structured, and for a reason. So usually when you do a PhD, the first year basically, or whatever, because there are different models, whether it's part time or not. But usually the first stage is to do literature review. Same reason people write the literature review first. You see literature review chapters first, because that's really the first stage. You have to. Even now, I'm thinking I'm only very slowly developing this project, this study that I'm planning to conduct. And also, it's kind of a side project, but what I'm doing at the moment, I'm only every now and then exploring a little bit of relevant literature, because I need to understand what is known in that field, because I have my ideas, but you can't just go and start doing something and then you'll find out, for example, oh, but there is plenty of literature about that. The wording you're using is confusing because everybody, for example, talks about it this way and you're talking about this way. So yeah, you just have to kind of uh, just catch up with what's been said, what's been done. And also, and why it's important is because it will give you so many ideas. You'll be, if somebody's on, about to do that and you haven't had an experience doing that, you'll be surprised how in that process how much changes, because you're reading, you're developing new ideas, you're learning about new methods and new ways people did something. So you're learning about the different gaps, like I said, things that need to be addressed, things that we know about, we don't know about. So it's really, it's if you looked at my proposal for what I wanted to do as my PhD research and what I actually did, they couldn't be more different, because that's what happens as you start reading. Everything changes. Your own ideas start to change. So it's always the first step, because later on you'll think about, for example, like I said, how to explore that idea. But before, you can't, again, just like I said about methodology, same with research methods. You can't say, I want to do interview study. It doesn't make any sense. The first thing you need to say is, I want to find out, for example, how people feel when this happens. So uh, for me, real life example, that I've been hacked recently. So the study I'm about to start planning is about like the psychological impact of cybercrime. So that's what I want to find out, and only from there. Now, like I said, I'm reading, I'm exploring, because plenty has been done, and later I'll be deciding, okay, what do I need to know? Do I need to know personal opinions? Yeah. If I need to know personal opinions, how do I get them? Probably talk to them. I need an interview in my study. Then I start planning. So that's basically the order. And yeah, and in terms of career, it's such a long and difficult topic, because unfortunately it can be hard. But I guess I do have some advice for that. So, um, firstly, at university, when people are still kind of in academia, then there are these positions like research assistants, research associates. It's not that easy sometimes to get into that either, unfortunately, but it's possible. But also, I was gonna, I guess, draw your attention somewhere else, because that's research associate assistant is exactly where usually you're looking, and that's where I spent time, probably too much time, looking for work as well initially. But there is so much outside academia, because everything these days is based on data. So everywhere people who know about data, about research, are needed. The only problem is that when I looked for jobs outside academia, I was using the same language when I was looking for jobs that I did in academia. So, for example, I was looking for research assistant positions, but people usually don't talk about research assistant as a job description outside academia. There are other things like data manager, there's something, assistant, research, expert. So it's a little thing, but believe me, I wasted so much time because I was using wrong, basically, keywords. But there is a lot of things like that. If you can afford to do it, there is sometimes there are like apprenticeships where it's like training. So you're either not getting paid or getting paid a little bit, not the full kind of wages. When I was a student, I was thinking, hell no, I'm not doing that. I have my knowledge, I'm paying for my PhD, I'm not going to work for free. But believe me, when I finished, I realized I wished that I had done that, because everybody asking you for some experience. How do you get experience when you just graduated? So I remember I just couldn't forgive myself for being like that, because I knew that it would have helped me, because usually when you go there, sometimes you just straight away get the job in that same place. But even if you don't, you have some training, you can put it on your CV. So yeah, if you can afford it, because like I said, sometimes you can't. You have children and all things, and you have your work and your studies. You can't have like a free, training. But if you can, then you may try like any experience that will help. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So yeah, I would just comment that we in academia, I believe that we where qualitative methodology or researches are so diverse, and you cannot find, or sometimes you can, but you cannot find the same thing in every research.
Mhm.
There's sort of diverse things, richness in those. So yeah, the things you mentioned really are the key points maybe for beginners. Uh, one thing today we talked about, one student mine was actually scammed online and for some money, but when she explained what so to say how reflective she became in sort of thinking and doing stuff, yeah,
Mhm.
she was grateful for that. So yeah,
Mhm.
that's something that was
Oh
really
yeah. I know all about it, because yeah, I've been also very badly hacked, and every link, everything these days, I'm
yeah,
so.
you're conscious about it.
Oh yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
there are things like, there are real companies, I guess, I hope that they sometimes reach out to me to collaborate. And there is one such company. They sent me an email almost 2 weeks ago. I'm still kind of thinking how to open that without, without risk. I'm just extremely paranoid, because that's how it happened. So by the way,
yeah,
everybody listening, it does happen. These things do happen. So be super
yeah.
careful. Like, every single link sent to you online can completely destroy you. And it's basically what
Yeah,
happened. But
yeah.
fortunately, I managed to get things
Now,
back.
yeah, when we just, because we are just talking about trustworthiness and credibility, is how to maintain or enhance the trustworthiness and credibility of qualitative research findings. And maybe
Hmm.
we can finish with that. Thank you very much once again.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So was it? You want me to talk about it? Yeah, because I couldn't. There was a
Yeah,
freeze.
just
Yeah. Yeah.
shortly. Yeah, just shortly
Okay.
your comment
Yeah. Yeah,
about the.
no problem at all. It's actually. I mean, it's such a. Yeah. You're welcome, Linda. I can see the chat. It's such a difficult question about trustworthiness. I will quickly talk about it, but I also have a blog article where I talk about it. It's called validity, because that's usually how I talk about it, validity in research. So if you just type validity, and then, like I did in the chat, it should show you the blog article. Uh, it's just how you type in Google. But basically, it's a very difficult topic, because in quantitative research, it's much, again, like I said, it's like scientific. It's much easier. It's either this or that. Either your study findings are valid or not valid. If you did it wrong, then they are not. Simple as that. But in qualitative research, it's not like that. And there is just, validity is mainly about showing that, as you said, they are trustworthy, they are credible. You can trust these results. However, in quantitative research, basically, uh, validity, to quickly explain validity and reliability, if you have bathroom scales where you measure how much you weigh, uh, validity means, are these scales measuring what they are designed to measure? If I'm standing on my scales in a bathroom and it's showing me the temperature outside, it's not a valid tool. Yeah, because it's not measuring what it's designed to measure. If it's showing me the weight, it's correct, it's valid. But if it's not showing me the same weight, so I walk on and off and on and off, and it's showing me every time different weight, then it means it's not reliable. That's what these words mean. So in quantitative research, it's very easy to make sure that it is. It's kind of replicable. You can replicate the same result. In qualitative research, you can't really, because it's about people and their beliefs and how they talk. So it's an extremely difficult concept. But like I said, in that blog, I explained there are certain strategies that you can use to enhance this validity, which basically means to reduce the bias, reduce your own bias as a researcher, your influence. So that's, in qualitative research, validity is mainly about reducing bias, which means, for example, reaching out to participants when you're analyzing the data, you're not sure what they meant. Before you make a conclusion or interpretation, ask them, is that what you meant? That's known as member check-in, and is already increasing validity of your findings. lots of other things like being transparent, documenting the whole process so that somebody can later say, you're showing me the results, I don't believe that you got these results. Then you can show me, actually, I have, look how I got it. So here is all the documentation. So being transparent. And a couple of other strategies you may have heard about: triangulation, like using different methods to observe something. So if I talk to you, but I talk to you about, your university, but then as an additional method, apart from relying on what you tell me, I will be observing you. So maybe how you teach or something. I'm triangulating the data. So I'm using different sources of data to confirm that it's in fact true. It's more trustworthy than if I just ask you and you tell me things. So if I go and observe you and then I collect, I don't know, some documentation from your university, in addition to that, I'm having yet another source of data. So I'm triangulating the data, and again, reducing the possibility that I may be biased, that what you told me was misinterpreted by me, for example, because I have now all these sources of data. So like I said, I list all these strategies in that blog article, but it's basically validity and trustworthiness and credibility is about reducing bias. And you don't have to use all these strategies, but the more you do to reduce that bias, the more possible it is that these are
Yeah, it's in terms being just transparent about maybe
definitely,
your
yeah.
even orientations or opinions on something, that may be conscious about it just in paper. So
Mhm.
yeah, thank you very much. This was just really, really insightful, and hopefully and surely our students will find it very useful. Hopefully we can publish this as well. So, and we will
Mhm.
do the because we have written transcript. We will do the translation for Bosnian. So, thank you very much once again.
Yeah, it was great to talk to you. And remember, I mean, reach out to me again later, and we can, think about continuing this collaboration. I love to contribute.
Great,
Uh,
great. Thank you so
all right.
much.